Judge Malcolm Whitaker never expected a routine traffic hearing to turn into the day his authority was publicly dismantled. But the moment he ordered a young woman to remove the silver star from her jacket, he unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would echo far beyond his courtroom. "Ma'am, I will not ask again. Remove that medal," he said, his voice sharp with irritation as it carried across the polished oak benches and beige walls of Cedar Ridge County Court. The woman in question, Captain Rachel Morgan, only 30 years old, sat in the third row of the gallery with her back straight and her hands folded calmly in her lap, her navy blazer neat, her dark hair pulled into a regulation bun that hinted at a life shaped by discipline. Pinned above her heart was the unmistakable ribbon and bronze star of the Silver Star, its edges catching the sterile fluorescent light overhead. She was not there for spectacle, nor attention, nor defiance. She had come quietly to support Private First Class Daniel Ruiz, a 19-year-old soldier stationed at nearby Fort Hamilton, who stood nervously before the bench facing a reckless driving charge he could not afford to contest, his dress uniform slightly too stiff, his voice barely audible when he answered the clerk's questions. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, annoyance tightening his features. "This courtroom has strict standards of decorum. Unauthorized decorations are not permitted. You will remove it." A faint murmur rippled through the sparse gallery. Two waiting attorneys, a tired mother with a toddler, a pair of off-duty deputies. But Rachel did not move. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, steady and unreadable. "It is authorized, Your Honor," she replied, her voice clear, even, and controlled, not loud but carrying to every corner of the silent room. The simplicity of her statement seemed to provoke him more than outright resistance would have. "Authorized by whom?" Whitaker demanded, tapping his gavel with a sharp crack that bounced off the tile floor. "I am the authority in this courtroom, and I say it is not." The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a kind but weary expression, shifted his weight uneasily near the aisle. He had noticed the medal the moment she entered. Unlike many civilians, he recognized it immediately, having served years earlier himself. He took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, something in Rachel's composed stillness giving him pause. She did not radiate arrogance or challenge. There was no smugness, no theatrical indignation, only quiet resolve. "This is not a parade ground," the judge continued, his tone rising with self-importance. "It is a place of law. Remove the trinket or you will be held in contempt." The word trinket landed like a dull thud in the room. Private Ruiz turned slightly, his face draining of color as he glanced back at Rachel, clearly aware of what that medal represented even if the judge was not. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but she gave the smallest shake of her head, a subtle signal that this was not his burden to carry. The bailiff approached her row slowly. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice meant only for her, "please don't make this difficult." Rachel finally looked up at him, her eyes calm, almost sympathetic. "I'm not," she answered softly. She made no move to stand, nor to reach for the medal. If it were to be removed, she would not assist in its dishonor. Judge Whitaker's patience snapped. "Bailiff, remove the contraband and escort her out. Her presence is a disruption." Contraband. The absurdity of the word seemed to thicken the air. For a fleeting moment, the quiet courtroom dissolved for Rachel, replaced by the deafening roar of gunfire and the acrid scent of smoke from a convoy ambush halfway across the world. She could almost feel again the sting of hot metal tearing through her shoulder, the weight of a wounded soldier slung across her back, the desperate rhythm of her own breath as she ran back into the open road a second time, then a third, refusing to leave anyone behind. The Silver Star was not decoration. It was a scar cast in bronze, a reminder of a day when fear had been swallowed because others needed her to move forward. Back in the present, the bailiff's hand hovered inches from her sleeve, reluctant, conflicted, the room holding its breath as if some invisible line was about to be crossed. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, mistaking her composure for defiance. "I find you in contempt of court," he declared, bringing the gavel down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "You will surrender that medal as evidence." Evidence. The young private at the defense table looked stricken, humiliation and confusion washing over him as the proceedings meant to judge his minor mistake spiraled into something far larger and far more raw. Rachel rose slowly to her feet, not in obedience, but in dignity, meeting the judge's gaze without hostility. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of memory pressing at her chest. "I respect this court." But before she could continue, the judge cut her off with a dismissive wave, unwilling to hear nuance where he perceived challenge. The bailiff hesitated one last time, then reached forward as ordered, his fingers brushing the fabric near the metal, and in that suspended instant, before contact became confiscation, before authority hardened into irreversible error, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom shifted slightly on their hinges, unnoticed by the judge but seen by several in the gallery. A subtle movement that hinted that the story unfolding in Cedar Ridge County Court was about to expand far beyond a traffic violation and a young captain's quiet refusal to surrender what she had earned in blood. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a firm, deliberate push, and before Judge Malcolm Whitaker could finish his next reprimand, the subtle shift in air pulled every gaze toward the aisle. Standing there in full army dress uniform was Colonel David Mercer, commanding officer of Fort Hamilton, Silver Eagle insignia gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights, ribbons perfectly aligned across his chest. Behind him followed the command sergeant major and two uniformed officers, their measured steps echoing softly against the tile as they advanced with calm precision down the center aisle. The bailiff instinctively withdrew his hand from Captain Rachel Morgan's jacket, and a deeper silence settled over the room. Judge Whitaker blinked, clearly unsettled. "This is highly irregular," he began, but Colonel Mercer did not acknowledge the interruption. He walked directly to Rachel and stopped before her row. Their eyes met briefly in quiet recognition. Then Mercer brought his heels together with a crisp click and raised his hand in a sharp salute. The gesture was unmistakable. A full colonel saluting a 30-year-old captain seated in a civilian courtroom. Rachel rose and returned the salute, her injured shoulder steady despite its old ache, and the gallery seemed to collectively hold its breath. Only after lowering his hand did Mercer turn toward the bench. "Your Honor," he said evenly, his voice controlled yet resonant. "Captain Rachel Morgan is a commissioned officer of the United States Army and a recipient of the Silver Star for gallantry in action." He paused, letting the words sink in. On April 12, 2019, during an insurgent ambush in Afghanistan, then, First Lieutenant Morgan advanced under sustained automatic fire to extract wounded soldiers from a disabled convoy vehicle. Though shot through the shoulder, she refused evacuation and continued to provide cover and medical aid, actions credited with saving 4 lives. The courtroom felt suddenly smaller. Private Ruiz stared at Rachel in stunned disbelief. The attorneys along the wall stood motionless. Even the court reporter's hands had stilled above the keyboard. Judge Whitaker shifted uncomfortably, the color draining from his face. Colonel Mercer continued, his tone cooling. "The decoration she is wearing is federally authorized recognition of valor. Its confiscation would be an overreach." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Authority radiated through calm certainty. Rachel spoke then, her voice steady and respectful. "Your Honor, I came only to support one of my soldiers. I respect this court, but that medal represents lives, not decoration." There was no anger in her words, only quiet truth. The judge cleared his throat, fingers hovering uncertainly over the gavel that now seemed diminished. "The contempt order is withdrawn," he announced stiffly. "The court acknowledges the authorization of the medal." After a brief hesitation, he added, "The charge against Private Ruiz is dismissed." A visible wave of relief washed over the young private. The colonel stepped aside slightly, tension easing but dignity intact, and as the proceedings faltered toward adjournment, the echo of that single salute lingered in the room, a silent reminder that some authority is granted by position, and some is earned under fire. The courtroom emptied far more quietly than it had filled, whispers trailing behind departing spectators, as though they feared speaking too loudly might disturb the gravity of what they had witnessed. Judge Malcolm Whitaker retreated quickly through the side door behind the bench, robe swaying, gavel left abandoned on polished wood that no longer seemed quite as imposing. Private First Class Daniel Ruiz stood frozen for a moment before turning to Captain Rachel Morgan, emotion written plainly across his young face. "Ma'am, I didn't know," he said, his voice unsteady. Rachel offered him a small, reassuring smile. "You weren't supposed to," she replied gently. "Just focus on staying out of trouble next time." Colonel David Mercer and the command sergeant major gave Ruiz a firm nod before escorting Rachel down the aisle, not as a spectacle, but as a quiet show of respect. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps, and for a moment the world felt startlingly normal. Cars passing, people checking phones, life continuing as if nothing monumental had occurred inside. Mercer stopped beside her. "You handled that with restraint," he said evenly. Rachel adjusted her blazer slightly where the silver star rested. "It wasn't a battlefield, sir." The colonel's expression softened just a fraction. "No, but it was still a test." She gave a faint shrug. "Standards matter. So does understanding them." Within days, word of the incident spread through Cedar Ridge and across Fort Hamilton. Though it never made national headlines, it traveled swiftly through veterans groups, legal circles, and the local community. The State Judicial Conduct Board opened a formal review. Judge Whitaker issued a public statement acknowledging his error, citing a lack of awareness regarding military decorations and expressing regret for what he called an unfortunate misjudgment. Mandatory cultural competency training focused on military service and federal recognition of valor was introduced for courthouse staff. Some saw it as damage control. Others saw it as necessary growth. Rachel did not seek updates. She returned to her duties on base, mentoring young officers, reviewing training schedules, and attending physical therapy appointments for the shoulder that still stiffened in cold weather. The silver star remained pinned only when appropriate, never worn casually, never displayed for attention. About a month later, she was at the Fort Hamilton commissary comparing labels on a shelf of canned soup when a familiar voice spoke carefully behind her. "Captain Morgan." She turned to find Judge Whitaker standing there in civilian clothes. No robe, no bench, no elevated platform to buffer him from consequence. He looked smaller somehow, the sharp edges of his earlier arrogance replaced by something humbler. "I wanted to apologize again," he said quietly. "Not because I was corrected, but because I was wrong." Rachel studied him for a moment, weighing sincerity not through words, but through tone and posture. The same way she once assessed risk in far more dangerous settings. "What you do after being wrong matters more," she said evenly. He nodded. "I've started meeting with veterans organizations in the county. Listening. Learning." There was no defensiveness in his voice now, only effort. Rachel gave a slight nod. "That's a good place to start." He exhaled, as if relieved she had not dismissed him outright. "Thank you, Captain." He left her there in the aisle, and she returned to her cart without lingering on the encounter. The battle in that courtroom had never truly been about pride or power. It had been about recognition, about understanding that some symbols carry weight earned in moments most will never see. As she stepped out into the parking lot, the afternoon light caught briefly on the bronze star above her heart before settling back into stillness. At 30 years old, she carried experiences many twice her age could not imagine, but she did not wear the medal to be seen. She wore it when necessary to honor those who had stood beside her in the smoke and noise, those who came home because someone ran forward instead of back, and those who did not return at all. Authority in a courtroom may come from a raised bench and a wooden gavel, but authority forged under fire carries a different gravity, one that does not shout, does not posture, and does not need to demand respect. It simply stands, steady and unmovable, until the room remembers what real courage looks like.